I'm Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you're listening to Hard Knock Life.
Well, it's the NOC in full color. You see me? The Hard Knock Life. Comics, movies, and TV.
Welcome to Hard Knock Life. I'm Keith Chow.
I'm Britney Monet.
I'm Dominic Ma.
I'm back. Thank you for holding it down once again. It's like I'm always taking breaks. Thank God you guys are around.
Yeah, we had fun, I think.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's what we do. It was cool talking about Suicide Squad and going to concerts and all of that stuff.
I was in the middle of hiking a mountain, so I wasn't around to partake in the conversation, but you guys had an amazing one. You know, shout out R.I.P. Milton.
Milton.
Oh, Milton.
Wait, who's Milton again?
Who's Milton?
He was driving a van, right?
Wait,
Yes.
You're not Milton? I thought you were Milton.
I just love that whole entire scene.
I mean, Bloodsport is so little known in DC fandom circles. I think he might as well be Milton. You know, as they argue, like, Milton is just about as popular a thing as Bloodsport, and I just mean that in the sense that Bloodsport is just a very minor character. I think I'm not.
I
being
didn't
a
even
huge
think he was a real
Superman fan.
character. I didn't know he was
You thought
real.
They made him up. Yeah.
I thought they made him up because, you know, when Idris was first announced, like 2 years ago, I think even Sean wrote a piece, like, everyone assumed he was just replacing Will Smith as Deadshot.
Yeah.
There are moments in the movie where it's like, oh, he was just replacing Deadshot, because some of it plays out as if, like, I could see, had Will Smith come back, he would have just been this character.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't have to create or bring in Bloodsport, you know? Like, the father with the heart of gold, all, you know, buried deep inside this, like, assassin's...
Yeah, very
with the
similar
daughter.
character. I mean, they just didn't want to do Deadshot, but fortunately DC has a bunch of characters who are like villains who are basically guys with high-tech guns. So it's not like a big leap for them to go sideways and find another one who happened to be Bloodsport.
Right.
I will mention one thing about this set visit that was, I'm not sure if this is a thing that should be mentioned, but we'll just try it. So when we were at the set visit and just learning what all the characters were, we got the impression that Idris Elba was Vigilante.
Mm-hmm.
Did you also remember before it was confirmed which characters that people were talking, oh, Vigilante is going to be in Suicide Squad?
I think so, and I think even in your set report, you mentioned, like, you had seen hints of characters like Vigilante and others.
So, I'll just say this. I didn't know it was Bloodsport. They didn't say Bloodsport once in the set list. It is possible it was Vigilante, and then they changed it to Bloodsport for some reason. Because, again, they're both guys with guns, so it's not too hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a little strange thing. Anyway, Vigilante, Bloodsport, neither of these guys are like A-list DC characters, so it doesn't really matter. But Vigilante is going to be in the Peacemaker series.
And I think maybe that's why they decided to go against and just add a whole new character, because they knew they were doing Peacemaker and wanted to bring in Vigilante. And Vigilante has a little bit of a higher profile just because he was a villain on Arrow, I believe, for a season.
Right. Yes.
So
yeah,
because I think from a script standpoint, when they wrote it, they were like, okay, we're going to bring back Will Smith, because I think there are just a lot of things in the structure of that character's arc that I could very much see Will Smith being there and playing that, and that just be Deadshot, right? And I think once Will Smith backed out, instead of like rewriting the whole script, it was like, well, let's just, like, to your point, find another guy with a gun and give him a daughter, and make his, like, whole redemption arc being like having this paternal instinct with one of the other characters, in this case Ratcatcher, right? Like, that's kind of very much like a Will Smith, specifically the Deadshot, like, version of Deadshot that I could see, you know, making this probably tie more into the original, so it feels more like a sequel had Will Smith come back. And I think once he was like, I ain't coming back to this shit.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, let's not change the script. Let's just find another guy with a gun and then bring him in. And that's how we got Bloodsport.
But can I say the irony of that is that I think that's probably exactly right, but can't we say that Deadshot arc with the daughter and everything, was that more satisfying in this movie than it was for Suicide Squad?
For sure.
I mean, they did it better. That kind
did
of very
everything better
similar
in this.
story. Right,
Yes.
they had a very similar story, but they did it, like, a lot better. Like, that Storm Reed character is a lot more fun than the first Suicide Squad movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Again, not the same character, same type of character.
Yeah, basically James did everything better, even if it was already kind of established in the first one. Or, yeah. It's not really a reboot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get the whole, like, you know, controversy is too strong a word, but, like, the whole question of, like, is this a reboot? Is this, like, Yes, it's clearly a sequel. I don't understand why it's so hard to like think of it as a sequel just because like the tone is different, but so is Birds of Prey. Like I can see a straight line from the first Suicide Squad to Birds of Prey to the Suicide. Like you know, it's almost like a Harley Quinn trilogy, right? Like you could see those three movies existing in the same chronology.
They do to me.
Yeah, why is it so hard to wrap your head around like this is the sequel? This is and I think it might be because nowadays sequel means it must continue a storyline, whereas like in the past a sequel is just the second movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Batman Returns has literally nothing to do with the first Batman, but it's a sequel. No one's like, does Batman Returns exist in the same universe as the original Bat? You know what I'm saying? Like Terminator 2, like is that it's like those are all just like this is an old school sequel in that like it's another movie with the same characters, the same actors having another adventure. And that's
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, not like you said, not everything needs to be a little episodic like the Star Wars movies, for example. Like that doesn't need to be that way in order to be a sequel.
Right.
But I liked
What's
it.
the Suicide Squad's grand plan? They didn't have a grand plan. You know, I'm like, fuck that. It didn't have to be a Suicide Squad plan.
No, I mean, yeah.
Go ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I don't. I was like, I don't even want to get down the road of like Star Wars versus what they did. I was like, no, let's not do that.
That would be a big tangent at this point. I can sense already. I think the Star Trek analogy is still very good. Like the first Star Trek movie, Star Trek motion picture, was not that good. I think that's like the first Suicide Squad movie, but the second one wasn't like in a different universe. It's the same people. It's just they did it a lot better. So I think the motion picture versus the Wrath of Khan analogy very much applies in the case of this Suicide Squad.
And I think we just need to be less precious about like these movies, right? Like not everything has to be a cinematic universe or a cinematic multiverse, right? Like they can just exist as films again, because again that's how like movies usually were for 100 years, and not everything had to be like chapters in a larger grand story, and I think it's all the better for it.
I feel like it works with Star Wars more than any of the other franchises. Marvel they kind of a little bit perfected it, but not everyone needs to do that. Like you said, not every film is going to lend itself to that type of form of storytelling. Like obviously with that monster universe they try to create with Universal Studios, like it's not going to work for everything, and that doesn't mean that you can't have successful movies or franchises. Not everything needs to be a shared universe.
Yeah. Like, is this the canon mummy? Does that mummy relate to the other mummy? Does that relate to the Scorpion King? Come on.
No.
Well, I think that's also like proof of nerds taking over mainstream culture, because I don't think Star Trek is another great analogy, because like as episodic as Star Trek is, I feel like Trekkies were the first to really like dive into like the nitty gritty of continuity and making sure that like everything from the original series through at this point Picard and Discovery like all line. And I think and I say this as someone's like continuity doesn't matter, but like one of the reasons it's hard for me to get into the newer Star Trek is that I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense in the original series time. You know what I mean? Like Enterprise is like, why are they all
Well, no, because Star Trek fandom imprints that on you. Because I think you're right. I think they were the fandom that was most dedicated about that, and that was kind of the allure.
Yeah.
But of course, they had to buck and sway whenever a new movie comes out, and they're like, "Oh, Kelvin Universe," and this is our new reboots, simply because we can't cast those old guys anymore.
Right. But I also love how like back in the day in Deep Space Nine, for example, they did an episode where Cisco and the crew actually went back into the timeline of the original series, and they kind of force gumped themselves into like an episode. I think it was the Tribble episode. One. No, it was great. It was like during like the 20th anniversary of Star Trek, so each show on the air at the time had like a special throwback episode, and the Deep Space Nine one is they inserted themselves into like the Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh, right on.
And they actually, I mean, they do it in a joking manner, but like they mention it like the Klingons don't have ridges on their foreheads, and Worf is like, we don't talk about that.
We don't.
And like, why does everything look so like kitschy and retro? It's like, well, this is just like, I think Dax picks up an old tricorder and she's like, oh, I miss the patent leather of these, this old technology, as if like the 23rd century kind of had this like 60s aesthetic in the 20th. You know what I'm saying? They're just kind of like the cheap sets were intentional. That's just what like future technology 200 years from now looks like. And
That's
I don't
really
know. I just
awesome and funny. Trouble is a classic too. And I believe in TV tropes they call that lampshading, where if a continuity thing is just not going to make sense, you just call it out and make a joke of it, and it's fine then. Can I say one more thing about the James Gunn thing? I'm sorry, just because I had
let's put a button on that. Yeah.
Whatever else you think about James Gunn, I realize that they're going to keep coming to him to do these big comic book movies because when he picks the very obscure characters, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't get the aggravated fandom coming out on Twitter worrying about whether they will do a character right or not, right? Like, no one was complaining, oh gosh, I hope they do Polka Dot Man right. Because no one cares. So by picking obscure characters, he at least sidesteps that weird, Twitter ranting that always happens whenever they announce a character who's more beloved.
There's
Is
always
that fair to
that
say?
one person though who's like, actually, and you know
Sure.
what I mean?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
always
yeah.
that one person who're like, no one cared about this character until, James Gunn picked up these characters. So it's very interesting to see people like still do that, even with obscure characters.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, relatively less. I know there's one
it's
person out
less.
there who
It's
is
much less, yes.
who is like, oh my god, they didn't do Polka Dot Man right. Or, oh my god, they didn't do... I still don't even know what Mongal is. But, oh my god, they didn't do Mongal true to the comic I loved. And for that one person, you are a very dedicated fan. Good for you. Or whatever. But you know what I mean? It's so much different from like, God, I just hope they do Batman right according to my feeling of what Batman is.
right.
Anyways,
No, I
justice
think
for
that's-
Blackguard.
Did he do Blackguard right? I don't know. Did he live up to Blackguard as we envisioned in our
I
hearts?
was just joking because I like Pete Davidson, so I was saying justice for Blackguard.
Yeah, true.
Why couldn't he get the HBO series, right?
Right?
They can resuscitate him. They just have to sew his face back on.
I know you said that was going to be the end, but one more thing about Suicide Squad is, we kind of referenced in a sideways way the Peacemaker show. Like, as great as John Cena was in the film, and I thought he was absolutely hysterical, the end credit scene sets up the Peacemaker series. I still don't know that I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to watch the Peacemaker series.
Good
Like,
God, no.
I'm intrigued, but it should have been Rick Flag. I'm sorry, they should have brought Rick Flag
Rick
back.
Flag with the giant shard in his heart. I don't think would be a good.
They can do it. They can bring it back.
They can. They have the technology.
They can bring back anybody. It's comic books.
I think what you said last week, Brittany, was what I want. Let's bring HBO spinoff from Birds of Prey and bring Journey back as Black Canary, because that's the show
I want
everybody
more than anything. Like, I would love that, and also still have like Rosie Perez too as Renee Montoya, and have them both on the show. Like, that would be such a great show.
Hell,
Yeah.
let's do an actual Birds of Prey show. Bring in Mary Elizabeth Winstead so she could be the Huntress, and let's just give us the Birds of Prey. I'll get to this in Nerd Poppin', but we have an Oracle in the Titans universe. We can port her over into the Birds of Prey series as well and have her actually be Oracle. So like, I'm all down for that. And again, we keep saying we're going to end the Suicide Squad talk. I did want to shout out Adonis Gonzalez on the website. He did a great piece about how a lot of the praise that's rightfully given to James Gunn for kind of like reinterpreting the DC universe, bringing this new aesthetic into the DC universe, which was previously grimdark, Zack Snyder, BVS, whatever. That should be the praise Cathy Yan got a year ago.
Yep.
And no one said anything about Cathy Yan's reinvention of the DC universe. And as the Birds of Prey like official Stan podcast, we want to shout out Adonis for that point too, because Cathy Yan deserves all of the credit for that kind of tonal shift. I think you said something on Twitter, Dominic, about her version or vision of the DC universe was as beautifully terrible or terribly. What did you call it? Like,
Well, I just was quoting the Warner Brothers PR machine, which decided to go hard with this from the horribly beautiful mind of James Gunn, both in light of his public image and to as if saying, this is a weird director's auteur vision of this movie, and that's why it'll be a little different, and that's fine. That's a PR thing. You gotta do your job, PR people. But that kind of talk is so like it's like the old school sexist way of like, oh my god, this white guy is such a visionary. All his weird things are like really beautiful in movies. Well, women do that too. Cathy Yan was as horribly a beautiful visionary force on Birds of Prey as with Suicide Squad. This is a both and thing, but you know that it's when they give accolades, it's very old school to just like celebrate the white guy director, and the woman director, the non-white director, is like, oh, maybe her take is just kind of weird and we don't like it.
Right.
What if, maybe it's horribly beautiful.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about that?
Yeah, no, I like you guys. I really love Birds of Prey, and I think Cathy Yan, she did it. The movie was amazing, and it really just sucks, like you were saying, that they did not PR that movie the same way. And then, you know, we were starting early stages of the pandemic too, so that movie is so great, and I just feel like so many people wrote it off as like, oh, it's a girl movie, or like,
right.
oh. And then what I think didn't help was that it was rated R, and that it was fronted as like a girl movie, and then little girls weren't able to see it because of that. So I feel like all of that kind of hindered the movie, but it's a great movie, and I think a lot of people need to give it another chance and watch it and really pay attention to it, because it's such a fun movie. It's good, and there's so many great character moments in that film.
I think it'll get some sort of resurgence as hopefully as this discourse continues.
Yeah, and it's not as hard an R as the Suicide Squad, right? Like,
No.
kids can actually. I think it's suitable for like teenagers at least, because like there isn't anything that's gratuitous. I mean, no one's face gets blown off, no one's head. You know, they kind of hint at someone's face getting cut off, but they don't actually show it the way they do in like Suicide Squad, where like literally Pete Davidson loses his beautiful mug. That was for you, Brittany. And in Birds of Prey, it's really just like F-bombs is the reason.
Justice for
that
Black
movie.
Card. Yeah. I mean, we haven't really talked about this at all in terms of streaming. I mean, what do ratings even matter anymore? Now it's just, can you get your kid, you know, looking away from the screen at the right time?
Right.
What does a rating matter when it's like streaming right into your home?
Yeah. Quick aside, since you mentioned streaming, it fills me with tremendous sadness that if you log into the kids version of HBO Max, like you could create a kids profile.
Yeah.
Like it still has the hubs that like the regular HBO Max has. So it has like a Cartoon Network hub, it has a Miyazaki hub, right? But it doesn't have a DC hub. Like,
okay,
I don't understand that. Like, how can you know, I get that like DC has so many like R-rated content now, like Titans is R-rated, Suicide Squad is R-rated, Birds of Prey, yada yada yada. But like the fact that you can't go into the kids profile and just have a hub of DC content that's kid friendly, just I don't know, it just makes me sad.
There is like kid friendly, like Static Shock.
That's what I'm saying. There's kid friendly DC content, but it's not hubbed together under a DC logo the way it is on the quote unquote adult side. Because
Can
I guess
you watch Static Shock on the kid side at least?
Yeah, you can watch all the DC content. It's just that like it's not grouped together. What I'm saying is that like it's just sad that when I go to the hubs in the kid version, it's just like Looney Tunes, Cartoon Network, and Studio Ghibli. And it's like, why isn't there a DC hub? Because there's like tons of DC content that's just for kids. But it's just the kind of like, I guess DC just doesn't want to be associated with like kids stuff, and it just makes me sad.
If they don't want to be associated with kids stuff, then what was the issue with Batman going down on Catwoman?
There you go. Right.
I'm sorry, I'm just being honest. Like, what's the issue then if you're not gonna like be associated with kids stuff?
Yeah, we're all adults here. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I feel like whether you might have gotten the wrong impression. One could have gotten the wrong impression from Space Jam, but I believe that DC Hub is like the proportion is overwhelmingly not for kids stuff. Can we say that? Is that fair to say? Like, when I scroll through that hub, I'm like, and this is violent, Even most of the animated ones are the, adult animated ones. The proportion of kid-oriented DC stuff on that hub is relatively small.
But but what I'm saying is that, like, I'm sure there's an algorithm that's smart enough that if a kid was on the kid-only profile in their parents' HBO Max account, and wanted to watch all of the DC stuff in one place, I think there is an algorithm that could just filter out.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely could make one. They definitely could
that's
make
all
one.
I'm saying.
I'm just remarking on what the normal DC Hub looks like, and this if you put that one filter on, you'd be down to like 5 or 6 things.
It's just all the Lego stuff and all the DC superhero girls stuff. But it's also like Super Friends, and I don't know. It's just it's a pointless thing to be upset about, and I'm not upset about it. It's just
I think they'll roll that out eventually.
I'm just sad that like I used to fantasize as a kid about before the era of streaming, like DC Comics should have its own channel on cable. Like the DC channel that would just air DC content 24/7. Back when cable channels existed, because now no one watches cable anymore. But I used to think, like, there's so many things, so many shows, so many movies that and cartoons, you could just have a cable network dedicated to DC stuff. In like Saturday mornings and after schools would just be like all the cartoons, and then maybe at night you'd have a movie, and then, you know, reruns of Lois and Clark, and basically what HBO Max is, right? Like the DC hub on HBO Max.
We're on the long winding road towards them getting to that thing you talk.
Right. It's kind of what I fantasize about. Now it's just
Marvel,
on demand, right? Like you can just watch whatever you want. You don't have to schedule at 3:00 Super Friends, at 4:00, you know, Batman the Animated Series, 7:00 Lois and Clark, or whatever, right? You can just watch whenever. You could create your own schedule.
Yes.
And if I was a nerdy kid that had all the time in the world, I would do that probably. Like, it's 4:00. I need to watch Batman the Animated Series.
No, I mean, and they have basically kind of what you were talking about with the Warner Brothers associated cable shows. For those of us who still have a regular cable package,
Right.
you know, sometimes like it's usually a marathon of all the DC stuff, and sometimes it's all the kid stuff, like the Lego stuff.
Yeah. So I think that's really cool. That's
I just wish we had HBO Max when we were doing DC TV Classics.
Oh,
It made
well,
our
that would
lives
be- right.
so much easier.
It would have been
right.
so easy.
Totally.
So easy. But anyway, let's get off of DC and let's move on to Warner Brothers, because I think the other interesting thing about, you know, we were talking about Birds of Prey and Suicide Squad, is that those two movies kind of bookend the pandemic. That, as you said, you know, Birds of Prey was the last movie for many of us pre-pandemic that we saw in theaters. And because of not only the PR and marketing of that movie, but I think because of the emerging pandemic that hit the box office really bad. Same thing's happening with Suicide Squad. Where Suicide Squad comes out, it's the tail end of the first version of the pandemic. We're at the beginnings of, you know, the sequel or reboot of coronavirus with the Delta variant. And the box office for Suicide Squad hasn't been great, right? Like, that's one of the things you guys didn't get a chance to talk about last week, was the actual reception. I think when you were recording, it wasn't sure how big a hit it was going to be, and then it turned out like it was an underperformer. It only made like $20 million at the box office.
And it underperformed on HBO Max less than Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
They said
Interesting.
more people streamed Mortal Kombat, which I'm not gonna lie, I watched Mortal Kombat like 3 times the first
Well,
week.
can't get enough shirtless Louis Tanner. in your
Got
life,
some
right?
hotties in there.
Yes, everybody, not just Liz Tan. A lot of hot men in that movie.
Yeah, Ludi Lin, right? Everyone is shirtless and hot.
But yeah, it's just wild to think that Mortal Kombat right now has the highest like opening weekend on HBO Max, like for highest streams. And there's some people who are upset about that because they're like, that movie wasn't even that great. And
Well, but that's a good, you know, thinking of that, like the way these movies bookend the coronavirus. And speaking of shirtless Asian guys, Simu Liu made some news this week when he kind of took umbrage to a Disney CEO. I don't even know what the CEO is. It was like a Disney corporate call. Was it Bob Iger?
it was Bob Chapek or something his name is.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you guys don't know, Disney did a call where they were talking about all their kind of stuff coming up, including Marvel stuff. And basically on the call, they said because of contracts with theaters, they cannot release Shang-Chi simultaneously on Disney Plus like they did with Black Widow. So that is a binding contract, and they're saying, well, we hope we can do a 45-day release in theaters for Shang-Chi and then move it to Disney Plus after the 45 days. And he did say an experiment, so it does kind of come off as like, oh, they're experimenting with the Asian movie. But it's, yes, I could say yes, I can see that to an extent, but if they already have existing contracts, and they don't want to get in trouble again like they just did with Scarlett Johansson, so they're going to, unfortunately, hold to those contracts, and you will not get to see Shang-Chi if you're not going to the theaters. Like, that's the truth. You gotta wait 45 days. Like, it sucks, because I really do love the option of watching it from home if I want to, but they made those contracts. Disney's not trying to get in trouble again, so they're gonna honor it, and you're gonna have to wait. It sucks,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I mean, I think I'm going to be a bad Asian and take the side of the mega corporate behemoth and say, like, it wasn't that big. I don't think there was any malicious intent in what the CEO or whoever the guy on the phone call was talking about. I think it's absolutely true. You have to consider what's going on in the world, and putting a movie out without streaming is kind of, uncharted waters at this point, because we don't know where Delta variant will be on September 3rd, and you don't want them to push the movie again, right? Like, I don't know. I just felt like the umbrage taken by Simu and some folks on Twitter that was like, how dare you say this, was just a little kind of like. To me, it wasn't that. I wasn't. I mean, I don't want to be that guy's like, well, I wasn't offended, but like, I didn't see what the big deal was that like Simu had to like put out this angry tweet.
Yeah,
it's like defiant.
He takes things to heart, and I understand being a person of color working in this industry.
Sure.
It's really hard. But I agree too that I don't think there was any malicious intent behind it. They were like, unfortunately, because of contracts, and again, they don't want to get in trouble like they did with Scarlett Johansson, that they're like, no, we're sorry, it has to stay in theaters for 45 days. That's why I think it just says in theaters and not in theaters only, because I think only means that there's a longer period of in between it hitting a streaming service than 45 days.
Yeah, I mean, the theatrical window is like shrinking.
They shortened
there won't
it.
be one. Yeah.
Yes.
There won't be one in the future.
Yeah, and I know they kind of said for the call, that which has thrown people off, that Eternals is going to count fiscally for them for 2022, but it is still planned to come out in November as of right now. And then they're still not saying anything about Spider-Man, because I don't know. I feel like they're really trying to like figure out how to release a trailer that doesn't over spoil all the good stuff that they're trying to do with that movie. But and then the case also gets pushed back. I feel like that's a part of another reason why they're not releasing a trailer.
Well, and you mentioned Spider-Man. Like, Venom has already been delayed. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, this is what I was saying, why I was making Suicide Squad, like, equivalent to Birds of Prey. We're at this, like, bleeding edge of yet another possible shutdown, another possible, like, surge in the coronavirus where we can't just be, milling about in crowded spaces again. To me, it just seemed like what they were saying was just reality. You know what I mean? Like, it's not cool, but this is something we don't know what to expect right now. And what I think the Disney guy was actually doing was protecting Shang-Chi, because if Shang-Chi opens on September 3rd and people are too scared to go to the theaters and it makes like $20 million, I think what Disney's saying is like, hey, this is, we understand this is theatrical only. We know people aren't coming out. This is kind of like uncharted territory, experimental release strategy right now. Not like, fuck the Chinese movie. It's like, we understand the reality. And I was like lowering expectations, because like a Marvel movie opens and it doesn't make $1 billion, it's a failure. And I think what he was trying to do was kind of like set the expectation game to be like, hey, we're not going to make $1 billion. So that's not going to be considered a failure.
Yeah,
so.
And we know that there's people who do not want to pay the $29.99 for Shang-Chi. If they are doing, we don't know yet if they're doing premium access though, with it coming onto Disney Plus after the theatrical release, which I hope they do, just so it can make some more kind of money, or at least maybe make it a little bit cheaper, and probably people will pay for it for sure.
I think they should fine-tune that premium plan.
Yeah, I think for maybe this one, lower it, just because, again, we're in a pandemic. It's getting worse. People might have to go back to working from home or not working at all.
Well, Dominic, you've been an advocate for over a year of we should just get rid of the theatrical window altogether, make everything like the HBO Max style of simultaneous digital theatrical, if you must have theatrical. Where do you fall in this whole experiment controversy by the Shang-Chi people?
No, I agree with you here. I mean, first, Asian Americans, let's not nitpick on the word, okay? The guy was not like, he didn't put that much thought into the word experiment. We're not saying like we did experiments with lightning in like a genetics lab on Asian. That's not what we're saying. He just used the word that he had to use at the time. But I will say, what I take the side of Simu's response. I thought was a very good response. I mean, you could look at it as angry and reactive or whatever, but I thought he kind of eloquently offered alternative things to say, like when he spoke of like we're the underdogs, we're the ceiling breakers, sort of a more refined way of framing this experiment thing, just because experiment sounds bad. But let's remember that for Asian Americans this is a big deal, because one of our biggest problems is in media representations. We don't have problems like, all non-white people problems are not all the same. We don't have the same socioeconomic problems. We don't have a similar problem, but we do have a specific big problem in media representation. So it's worth remembering that. It's worth the star of the movie coming out to remind us of that. This is a big deal for Asian Americans. It's not like something it's not like something you just sweep under the rug.
Right. But I think what rubs me the wrong way, and I apologize. I don't want to have any kind of like anti-Simu hate come my way, because I'm not trying to say that I'm against. Please, Simu stands, do not at me.
Simu stand.
But I think what put a bad taste in my mouth with that whole "we are underdogs" whatever, which is, like, to your point, a very eloquently put tweet, but also led to a lot of like, y'all better do for Shang-Chi what you did for Black Panther.
Ooh,
and it's just like,
I have words for that.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's a poor comparison.
Yeah, you
Very
know what I'm
poor.
saying. But that's like, it was just kind of like the logical next step, I guess, from that tweet was that, like, basically saying that, like, Shang-Chi is the Black Panther, and like the only thing that those two movies have in common is that they're both Marvel superheroes. Like, other than that, there's nothing in common between.
Hey, they're both martial artists. all right. Well, I won't go down the road of what they do have in common.
but Brittany, you wanted to jump in on this, like the whole notion of like the fans who kind of used that tweet as like a calling card for like, and I feel like they were like singling out Black Twitter. It's like, y'all better support us the way we support you, like as if like Asian Americans are the ones who put Black Panther over.
Yeah.
The thing is
that
people need to realize about Black Panther, why it did so well, is because so many black people who are not on Twitter, black people who have never seen a Marvel movie before Black Panther, black people who have never read a comic book, black people are just not on social media, showed up for this movie. My grandma, who really has only seen Marvel movies unless me or one of my other like cousins or brothers or whatever force her to watch movies, she doesn't go see Marvel movies. She went to see Black Panther willingly because she knew what it meant to black people as a community. There was a lot of black people who went to go see it because we understood what it meant as a community. Now, some of us, yes, are online. Some of us, yes, are reading comic books or at least fans of Marvel movies. But that was not the case for every single black person who bought a ticket and showed up for Black Panther. You have to realize a lot of people saw it because they were like, oh, whoa, this is a superhero movie with all black people? When has this ever happened? Like, and that's what you have to realize, that we showed up as a whole community regardless of where we stood with Marvel and comics, and
Yeah.
or even just being online. So that's something that I think people need to understand, that it was not just like, and there's people who also fundraise money for like, the Boys and Girl Clubs of America and blah, 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 to be able to take black kids to see this movie too. Like, there was a lot of stuff that happened with that from the black community trying to support within the community, and because we had this representation. So that's why it's like saying the black people need to step up and do the same thing for Shang-Chi is not going to be the same, because that's not our culture. That's not our personal representation. That's not saying that, no, don't show up for Shang-Chi, but it's just like, it's on, unfortunately, the Asian American community to step up for your own representation and go see it. And
Yeah.
I
mean, and that's the thing. Like, it's one thing to like call out your community and say, "Hey, come support us." Like, that's the whole like premise of the Gold Open folks, right? Like, their whole deal is that like, let's bring out the Asian American community. And this seems to always happen. Now that we're getting more like Asian-led content, it's like we always have to put it up against Black Panther for some reason. Because this was what the people said when Crazy Rich Asians came out, right? Like, this is our Black Panther. It's like, I mean, to be honest, like, I feel like the comparison is probably more apt for Crazy Rich Asians in a way, because it was the first like major big Asian American project, right? Like, this is what Brittany's saying about Black Panther. It's like, now we've had like several since Crazy Rich Asians. Like, I don't know why Shang-Chi has to be Black Panther too, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's really a silly thing to say. I mean, it's not 1-to-1, and like, don't make this like simple knee-jerk thing like, oh, black people have to show up for Shang-Chi. What's that even mean? Because Asian people liked Black Panther. Also went to see Black Panther, which almost everybody did.
Yeah, that movie made $2 billion.
That's
Everybody
nonsense.
saw Black Panther.
I mean, I don't know. Reading Twitter lately, I'm a little concerned about the ablation that is the Black American and Asian American relations. Like, I see some beefs like being started that remind me of like Russian troll type beefs, as if to incite dissent and something hard to argue about. I don't know. I'm a little concerned about this. I don't know, and that's why I'm glad we have things like this Nerds of Color show, which is
That's why, we celebrate all
is-
people.
Yeah,
very much that's Black Americans and Asian Americans in content, if in form, if not in content. Sorry, I was blabbering. Go on.
I was gonna say, I want to make clear though, I personally am showing up for Shang-Chi. He's one of my favorite characters in the comics, regardless of how people feel about the Simu. I want to see it. I like him. I know people don't like him. I just think he's a very sensitive person, so I kind of let him like just be his own thing and not really.
I like him too. I think Keith is the guy who talks shit sometimes.
What? Again.
Oh,
Simu
sorry,
stands.
that never happened.
Please,
Sorry,
do
that
not
never
at
happened.
me.
That never happened. I forgot. That was a Snapchat.
Yeah, no, I genuinely like him though. He's just,
He's fine.
I agree that yes, he's a little sensitive, but I like him. I think he's great, and I'm really hoping that he will, have the career I hope he will get from this movie. But I can't say that it's the responsibility of all other Black people to go support this movie like I plan to do it.
I mean, for what it's worth, I don't know if this Asian guy is going to be supporting Shang-Chi when it comes out, at least, because I'm not, I went to see Snake Eyes in the theater. I think my quota for going to the theater to see a movie has been reached. So I will wait the 45 days if need be to see it. Unless Disney, unless you have screeners to send out, I will be happy to watch Shang-Chi on the screener. But other than that, I may be waiting till
that. And we'll promote it in our at-home kind of way.
I heard they're not sending out digital screeners to critics for this movie, and it's just like, well, there's a lot of critics who are people who have, immune issues or are disabled, and going to a movie right now in the pandemic is not for them, so you should be sending out digital screeners to critics right now. Like, I don't know, and not doing that is going to not help you, because that means more people are not getting reviews about if they should go see this movie or not, and you're not helping by not sending out digital screeners to people. I don't know. It's very head scratching stuff that's going on.
Heads are being scratched. Can I add a couple things on that topic?
Oh, yes,
one
go for
thing
it.
I wanted to say that, so just on a practical level, a lot of the organizing in-person stuff that people did around Black Panther's release that enabled to have such a big box office impact obviously is just not possible, just not practically possible right now. We can't have the parties, this sort of special gatherings, that people organize. So forget about that. That's not even something that can be compared, because it's not possible to do that kind of street level box office opening for Shang-Chi. But one thing, when I was reading all this stuff about the experiment stuff, that hit me that I didn't quite realize before was that I believe all this is Marvel being really worried about Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay,
speak more about that. I don't.
Well,
how is it related?
In the sense that when they talk about things like experiment, and again, this goes to the pandemic, and when we talk about this large pandemic problem of whether we're going to have hybrid releases or only in theaters, Spider-Man No Way Home is going to be a huge movie, or it's supposed to be a huge movie. Shang-Chi, maybe. Eternals, maybe. Spider-Man No Way Home should be a gigantic movie. If something happens, I'm just saying that's the one they're really putting all their marbles on, right? So yes, they are going to use these first two movies comes out in a way experimenting to see how they can prepare for what should be the hugest movie of the year coming out in a time which might be peak pandemic part 2. You know what I'm saying? I think all this is dancing around. They're not, and that's why they haven't released a trailer.
I feel like there's a couple reasons why they haven't released the trailer.
Oh,
I
no,
agree that it's
couple
one
reasons.
of it, that part of the pandemic, and they're not sure if it's releasing in this year is part of why we haven't seen anything with Spider-Man. And number 2 is I really think they don't know how to cut a trailer without it giving away too much, and there's some things that they probably want to...
I think that's right too, yeah.
Even if all of the speculation or even half of the speculation is true of who's gonna be in this movie, they're trying really hard to keep it under wraps, because we usually get a trailer for a Marvel movie when they are in additional filming and reshoots, which I don't know if they finished additional filming and reshoots, but we know as of last week or the week before they were doing that for Spider-Man. We haven't got a trailer, so
I think they're not sure how they're even gonna release it. I think they're really not sure, and they are literally using Shang-Chi and Eternals to test the waters, because they have a lot more marbles invested in Spider-Man than those two other movies. I mean,
well, added wrinkle to Spider-Man is that it's technically still a Sony release. Like I don't know how much Disney has.
Right. Sorry.
You know,
maybe
what I'm saying. But no,
that.
but I think there's definitely a correlation. But you know, in terms of like looking at the marketing, you know, like Venom's delay, you know, it's interesting. It's the movie's called Let There Be Carnage, but like not that much carnage because we don't want to be we don't want to be put in theaters and causing a lot of carnage. If I'm sorry, bad joke and tasteless too soon. But,
is actually going to happen too. But we don't
like
talk about
literally
that.
Let There Be Carnage.
Yeah, people are just fucking losing their shit in airplanes and restaurants. That's gonna wait. I'm sorry, and I promised myself I would never ask this question again. But is the freaking next Spider-Man movie just like full Sony Marvel hybrid?
Well, I think the way the Sony Marvel contract works is that basically Sony's allowed to have Marvel characters in their movie and be considered part of the Marvel universe, you know, officially, unlike Venom, right? Like Venom is Sony only. They're in association with Marvel. They're not actually part of the Marvel continuity. The Spider-Man movies are, so therefore they're basically leasing like Tony Stark and in this case Doctor Strange in their movie, right? And then in exchange we get to have Spider-Man in our Avengers movie, right? Like, but the Spider-Man solo movie is always going to be a Sony property until the contract is up, which it was. And there was that whole thing about like, we're going to take Tom Holland out of the Marvel universe before they reached a deal to make this movie.
But Marvel Studios has an interest in it as a financial interest. It's not like they don't care what happens to the Spider-Man movie.
No,
so
you're
I think
right.
I think
that's right.
They're talking
it won't
about
be on
it.
Disney Plus, though.
It won't be on Disney,
and they can't. Well, that's what I was getting at too.
Or...
Like because it's a Sony only distribution property. Even if they wanted to put it on streaming, there is no place to put it on streaming.
Didn't they cut a deal with Netflix to put the Spider-Man movies on there?
I guarantee Disney would be like, no, you are not having a simultaneous Spider-Man release on Netflix of all places, right?
They would raise hell.
Yeah, they would. They would prevent.
Because
Disney would prevent that from happening.
They get some of the money from the release, so they would raise hell if that happened.
Right. So even more so, they're getting locked into this thing of only in theaters December when we said it was.
But it might not even come out then because they've already pushed back Venom and Venom is Sony. And then, but here's the thing though, Michael Keaton is in the Venom movie, so I am very curious as to is Michael
Keaton in the Venom movie? He's in the Morbius movie for sure. I know that he's in
every movie, man. He's in Flashpoint. Okay. He's everywhere in all things.
Yeah, he's also in the Flash. The funny thing is he's playing Batman in Venom and he's playing Vulture in Flash. It's really weird.
You're making stuff up now, Keith.
No, in a what if universe, I'm sure there is a Jeffrey Wright narrated universe in which Batman shows up in a Spider-Man.
I'm sorry, we got off track.
That's a great segue. And segues that you point out as great segues are rarely great segues. So we wouldn't be a Hard Knock Life if we didn't talk about the latest Marvel Disney Plus show to drop. And we are in the wake of the most recent, which is a new one. We have a new series, like Loki's over, and now it's the What If world. And, you know, I think a lot of folks, when What If was announced, thought it was just, okay, they're just going to do an animated show, not realizing how connected to the, like, you know, overall cinematic universe it was going to be. And I think it actually is the perfect next step after Loki, because Loki breaks the multiverse, and now we have Uatu telling us, like, here are all the things that are happening in those fragmented time streams that we saw at the end of Loki. And in the first one, I think was a great episode. I was actually hesitant going into What If because I didn't think I would like the animation because it reminded me of Resistance, and I know Star Wars Resistance was a great show. I was just put off by the animation, so I never got into it.
Same.
The animation for What If looked very similar, and I wasn't sure I was going to get into it, but like quickly I got adapted. I think it helped to have, you know, them basically reboot and remix one of my favorite MCU movies, the first Captain America, and that, you know, a lot of it was like shot for shot. So before I get into it, like, what did you guys think of the first episode of What If and the creation of Captain Carter?
I loved it. It was so much fun because I really like Haley Atwell. She's so good, and I know that she keeps coming back for like Peggy every time. And I don't know, I liked it. It makes me really like kind of mad that her show isn't canon, even though Jarvis from the show showed up in Endgame. Oh, anyways, it was really great. I loved her. The guy who actually voiced Steve did like a pretty good
Yeah, surprisingly pretty good Chris Evans.
Yes, I was really surprised it wasn't him. He did
It's
so
funny,
well.
I thought he sounded more like Chris Evans than Sebastian Stan sounded like Sebastian Stan.
Yes, and it was actually Sebastian
Yeah.
Stan being Sebastian Stan. But I liked it, and Jeffrey Wright just narrating like the first part of the show. I was like, ooh, this just sets the tone so well. I love Jeffrey Wright. He's one of like my favorite actors. So he was good, but I'm very curious as to what it means for his character at the end of this show, because he's like, even though I see all these things happening in all these universes, I cannot and I will not intervene. But he says it twice. So
Which
I'm
means
just
he will.
like, he will.
I mean,
which
in the
means he
comics,
will.
Uatu intervenes all the damn time, right? Like, that was, like, he'd be a really boring character in the comics if he
So
didn't.
I'm very curious what's going to be his breaking point, which obviously is going to be the last, like, episode, I would assume. But I'm just like, And now he's going to be, what, in both universes live action? I'm very curious.
Oh, I don't know.
You know, he's Commissioner Gordon.
Right. And we've seen Watchers in live action. If you remember in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I believe,
Yes.
we see Stan Lee talking to the Watchers. So it's like
Yeah.
they do exist in the live action verse
Yes,
as well.
they do. So I'm very curious to what's going to happen. I just love Jeffrey Wright, so I'm just like, I want to see him in everything.
That dude is great.
Everything.
High quality.
Were you into Captain Carter, Dominic?
I didn't watch it. My bad. I just
Oh,
read
you
about it on social
motherfucker.
media.
How dare you?
Go ahead. You guys talk about it.
I mean, I liked how it was like a remix of First Avenger. And you know what was also cool, deep cut? It took me a while, because at first I was thinking, wait, did they just recast Tommy Lee Jones as Bradley Whitford? And then I remembered that Bradley Whitford was in the first Agent Carter Marvel one-shot, which was like their short film that was attached to one of their DVDs. Before, that was basically the pilot to like the series that Britney talks about.
It's really great.
Yeah, and Bradley Whitford was like the male chauvinist boss who kind of dismisses Peggy.
Right.
And it was kind of cool. They brought him in as because if you go back and watch that first episode of What If again, you see that Tommy Lee Jones' Colonel Phillips dies
there.
in the explosion.
Yeah.
He is there, but he dies in the explosion. And so like Bradley Whitford takes that role because they couldn't bring Tommy Lee Jones back. Because he doesn't even know he was in that first Captain America movie, right? Like, if you ask him, like, Tommy Lee Jones, what does it feel like to be in a Marvel? He's like, I wasn't in a Marvel movie, because he doesn't give a shit. But so it was kind of cool they brought Bradley Whitford in and he kind of reprises the character that he played in this, to bring together the entire continuity of Marvel, cinematic universe. Let's pluck the guy from the one shot that was attached to a Thor DVD or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And, like, have him reprise his role. But it's really good, Dominic. You should watch it.
No, I'm going to. I was just watching the Harley Quinn cartoon instead. I'm totally for the idea. I like the idea of What If. I'm not watching it for a reason. I think it's
the
cool.
next episode of What If is
It's Black Panther.
Yeah, well, it's T'Challa.
Well,
Star-Lord.
T'Challa, right.
And it is going to be the last performance from Chadwick Boseman, so I know I'm
that
going
right?
to be very emotional.
Wow.
Yes, because What If was the last thing he actually worked on, so
wow.
that is going to be all. That's all we're going to get from him again.
Well, and maybe not, because I think to your point, Brittany, I think it's not an anthology series. I think the final episode is all of these random multiverse bits somehow coming together. So we may see T'Challa come back.
Yes, but this is the
After.
last project he has done.
Right. What If is the last project? The episode he's on next week may not be the last time we hear Chadwick in a Marvel
That'd be
property.
great.
Maybe.
This will
I
be
didn't
the
realize
last.
that.
This project, regardless, well, hopefully he will come back in one more episode. But yeah, this is definitely like the last thing that we will see of him, or hear of him actually. So I'm just emotional thinking about it.
Yeah,
Gone too soon.
for sure. I'm reminded of, this isn't a perfect analogy, but like Orson Welles' last performance being in Transformers the movie and voicing a giant robot. I mean, just when, a very famous actor, celebrity of great renown, sometimes their final performance is voicing an animated series, which you wouldn't normally think of, but in this case, looking forward to that. That would be great.
So we'll end it there and go to what's nerd poppin'. Let's start with you, Brittany. What's nerd poppin'?
Well, stunt coordinator for Iron Fist, I believe his name is Brett
Chan.
He was on a podcast or YouTube interview, both, I'm not sure, something like that, and he admitted that Finn never showed up for training, was very not willing to really work with the stunt team and whatnot, and But Jessica Henwick was training every day, 4 hours a day, and like it shows. And it's just so frustrating because so many people like to pull the story of like, oh no, he just like got cast like 6 weeks before filming, so he didn't have enough time to train and blah blah blah. I don't think that. It's bullshit. I'm sorry, especially when you have Jeff Loeb, who made it clear that he had issue with Asian people, and like, I'm sorry, there's no way. And like, I would say yes, no, it's not Finn Jones alone that made the first season of Iron Fist terrible. It was Scott Buck as well. Yes. But I just feel very vindicted in the fact that no, he was a terrible Iron Fist.
Vindicated. You just
Did I say it wrong?
Yeah. You sound vindictive, but you were vindicated.
Vindictive or vindicated. I wasn't sure which one.
Yes, well, you know the word I mean. But it's just nice to know that I was right in the sense that he was not ever like gonna be the right Iron Fist. And I'm not gonna lie, before like we saw like set footage and stuff of Finn, I was like, no, I think he'll do great. He'll be fine. He's great on Game of Thrones. And then, you know, he did not do great. So it's nice to know that, you know, they really did fumble the ball.
That is a really funny anecdote, and because you can so tell, just watching it, you can so tell. Iron Fist scenes are not that great, and Jessica Henwick's scenes are pretty good.
Yeah, it's so odd. And there's people who are like, no, they're trying to lie on Finn. And I'm like, no, they're not. Like, you need to, I'm sorry, you guys.
He still has defenders? Like, no pun intended. He still has defenders?
Yeah, they held him up that whole show. Didn't you watch it?
Yes, there's someone who, like, I don't know what their Twitter name was, but, like, they were like, no, like, people keep lying on Finn. And I'm like, no, I think
as far as I'm concerned, Jessica Henwick is the only Iron Fist that exists. I don't even know who this Finn Jones person you're talking about.
That was the best thing. That was the best thing that came out of those 2 seasons.
I thought when the guy said Iron Fist wasn't very good on the show, I was like, what are you talking about? Jessica Henwick was great on the show.
Was great, and she wore something close to costume. Yeah, and freaking it again. You can't overstate what an outlier Iron Fist is. It's just like, because it's not that good, except for Jessica Henwick, and all the other Marvel series are pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean it's weird.
It frustrates me. There's people who still defend it and like, no, he's a great Iron Fist. I'm like, no, he was not. He was terrible. They need to cast someone else.
Who are we talking about again? Milton?
We're talking about Milton.
Who's Milton?
The Milton of the Marvel Universe.
Milton of that.
Some guy who died and then Jessica Henwick.
Wait. No. We like Milton. You can't.
Oh, that's true. You're right. I'm sorry, Milton.
That's disrespectful.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I take that back. Milton is great.
Respect Milton. We won't.
But I don't know who this person you're talking about is.
But yes, I'm just glad that confirmed what most people believed, except for the few set of people who are.
Yeah.
You know,
those people don't have eyes, because if you watch Iron Fist, you would see that the white guy with the giant tattoo on his chest was terrible. Yeah. Dominic, what's nerd popping?
So many feelings. Vindication of one of those feelings. Oh, speaking of World of Wakanda related things, Marvel's Avengers video game this week is going to come out with a big expansion pack, which includes Black Panther as a playable character and includes Wakanda as a new mission that you can go through. And for video game heads that are interested in this sort of stuff, it's a big deal. Me and Jamal will probably do some covering of that on the blog and other places. But just to sum up, basically, you know, the Marvel's Avengers video game is very erratic, might be a nice way to put it. It has some parts that are pretty good, and then a lot of it kind of sucks. And a lot of people observed that it's sort of most fun as a Kamala Khan campaign game. That's sort of the most solid part of it, is you play through as Miss Marvel. And so this is a fairly big deal because I'm excited to play as Black Panther. So we'll see how that goes. What's nerd popping with you, Keith?
So I'm going to take it out of the Marvel universe, because I feel like whenever I'm not around, this show becomes a Marvel only. Although last week you talked about Suicide Squad, so I appreciate you bringing DC back into the fold. But I will remove the nerd pop and stuff out of the Marvel and put it right smack dab back into DC and talk about a show that I had reservations about when it first came out 2 years ago. And I'm actually back on board. And I really liked season 2. And so far, digging season 3, the first 3 episodes dropped on HBO Max this weekend. I'm talking about Titans. And, you know, I love how it kind of redefined itself in season 2. Because in season 1, it was kind of like going for that whole grimdark, fuck Batman, sticking garden shears up people's crotches kind of aesthetic.
Damn.
And season 2 kind of lightened up a little bit, right? Like, it was more about the team, because, like, I don't think they said the word Titans in the whole of season 1, right? And in season 2, it was like, oh, actually, there was a whole Teen Titans team. We have a tower and everything. And, you know, season 2 felt more like a Teen Titans show. I think it's still, like, you know, unnecessarily R-rated, because some properties in the DC universe lend themselves to an R rating. Suicide Squad, definitely an R-rated property. Harley Quinn, I can see having an R-rated, you know, aesthetic. The Teen Titans never came off to me as like an R-rated, you know, whatever. But I've gotten over my prudish, like, can't stand hearing the F-bomb come out of Robin's mouth type thing. It's fine. I've tuned that out. It's totally cool now. And I really like it. And one of the things that I like about this season so far is that they're doing essentially the Under the Red Hood story. So, spoiler, if you know Jason Todd was a big part of season 2, the main bad guy so far is Red Hood. So, like, you do the math, what happens to Jason Todd in this season. But I think so far they've done a really good job. They've introduced Barbara Gordon, and she's the Oracle version of Barbara Gordon. And they cast an actual disabled actress to play her, which is cool. That's something that I've always fan cast when thinking of doing an Oracle Barbara Gordon, to actually cast a disabled actress to play the part, and they did that here. The addition of Superboy last year and Crypto have been like my favorite parts of the show. Like, I really Crypto is actually my favorite character on Titans, and I really like it. I'm not going to spoil it because I know you guys haven't watched it yet, and if anyone out there has yet to tune into Titans, I suggest skip season 1. Like, I don't think you need season 1.
I liked season 1.
Really?
I
didn't like
liked the first 2. I think the second season is definitely better.
Yeah.
But I did like the first season. That's another show that I actually happened to watch with my mom, so I can't like watch it yet. And the thing was, when I put it on, I didn't think she was going to watch it. She was at first in the other room doing other stuff, and then she was like, oh, what are you watching right now? I'm like, Titans. And she's like, oh, what is that? I'm like, it's a superhero show. She's like, oh. She sat down with me. She's like, I really like this. Let's watch more. So it just turned out that my mom liked it a lot, so that's why now we watch it together, and I can't watch it.
I'll say one more thing about season 3, though, Brittany, that I think you will appreciate, having watched the first 2, is that the first 2 seasons, of course, were on DC Universe first, which was DC's fledgling, you know, streaming service, which they've gotten rid of, and now it's just a comics reading app. Season 3 is very much an HBO Max production, and it looks like it. Like,
nice.
The budget has increased by like
that's
tenfold,
what
and you can tell.
I'm looking forward to.
You can tell like 5 minutes into the episode, you're like, oh, they got real money now.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
There's a great scene in the beginning of episode 1 where you see the Titans actually take down. What's his name? He's one of the Hive villains. Oh, I forgot who he was. Like, if you watch Teen Titans Go, you'll recognize him right away. He's the one with the goggles. Anyway, Gizmo. They take down Gizmo. From the Hive. And it's a great, like, again, they work as a team. You see Beast Boy do his thing, Starfire does her thing, Superboy, Crypto, like, they're all participating. There's a great, like, you know, Nightwing fight scene. It's really cool. And I didn't think I'd come around on Titans, and I have. And so far, season 3 has been really good.
I can't wait for Doom Patrol, though. That show is just...
and that's coming back in a couple weeks, too. So, cool. HBO Max, and I'm sure HBO Max, you'll see its imprint on Doom Patrol when it comes back. Because DC Universe was, you know, as try as they might, they had, I'm sure, budget constraints. HBO money's a whole other ball of wax.
Yes.
And it definitely... I mean, you know, it looks more expensive than the CW shows, right? CW shows the budget. You can clearly see. And HBO is the perfect place for it, and... I again, watch it. It's really good, and I'm a fan. I can't believe I'm saying I'm a fan of Titans.
It sort of fits better on HBO Max. I think part of when I remember talking with you about it, it seemed a little disconnect when they were rolling out DC Universe, which no longer exists in that form. It seemed a little too harsh to have this edgelordy, angry version of the DC team on DC Universe. But to me, when I just say it out loud, yeah, you know, kind of hard, angry Titans work. It totally sounds like a Cinemax show, an HBO Max show.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like DC Universe, when that was the first original on DC Universe, it was next to like Wonder Woman and Lois and Clark.
Weird.
And like it was this kind of like wholesome DC shows, and then fuck Batman, right?
Yeah.
Like it just didn't fit. Whereas like on HBO Max, like it's next to the Suicide Squad. Like if you go
every
to
other violent DC show, or
if you go to the DC
every
Hub,
other violent HBO show,
right? If you go to the DC Hub I was talking about, it's like Suicide Squad and Titans. It was like, oh, that makes sense as a pair,
yes,
right?
It's a good pairing.
So yeah, I mean, I think I've gotten over my issues with R-rated DC properties, and it's fine. But whatever, I don't care.
I always thought the thing with Titans was not going to be that was be too violent, but that would be too sexy.
Sexual,
as
right,
far as
right,
adult
because
content.
the right.
Do you think they're going to ramp up the sexiness? I mean, it's a fairly sexy show, but
yeah, there's a lot of banging. There's a lot of boning on the show.
There's
a little bit of nudity. Spoiler alert, Brittany. I don't know what you feel about Alan Richardson as a hot guy.
Which was that?
He's a hawk.
Oh,
Hawk.
he's okay.
Oh, okay, because he gets
he's
real
big.
naked.
He's a big dude.
He just gets real naked in this episode.
Cool.
So.
I don't know. He's one of those dudes who I understand everyone's appeal, but he doesn't. I like dudes who seem like they're tortured and sad.
Oh,
like
okay.
Pete Davidson and like Adam Driver.
Right.
And then there's Louis Tan. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Even though he
Okay,
doesn't
well,
seem
I
like
was
he's
just
tortured
putting it
and
out
sad.
there. Like he gets super naked in episode 3. So,
Okay.
and like they show all the bits, so it's like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing now on.
That's why we love HBO.
It's like you can't show a silhouette of Bruce Wayne's cock in the comics, but like Hawk's cock in live action, sure, why not?
Cock and Dove.
Oh, episode title, maybe.
Probably not.
Probably
but
not.
maybe. Maybe someday.
I love how it'll just get all the way to the end, and they're like, "Wait, it took that long for the title to pop up."
Like, what does this mean? Brittany, how can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at Hi Brittany Monet. You can also follow my other podcast at Naomi Podcast, which is the double stream for Naomi Podcast and the Lituation Room, which we just recorded the first episode for Lituation Room yesterday, so that should be out soon. And eventually Naomi Podcast will come out closer to when it's time to do a season 0, basically, because that show's not coming out till like sometime next year. So that's what's going on with me.
Cool. Dominic.
I'm Dom Ma on Twitter or Instagram, and I also write stuff for the Nerds of Color blog.
I am Keith Chow. You can follow me at The Real Chow on Twitter, _real_Chow, and at Real Keith Chow on Instagram. Follow the pod at The Nerds of Color and go to hardknockmedia.com to find this and all the podcasts in the Hard Knock family. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/The Nerds of Color. Buy merchandise at TeePublic. Support us on Patreon. And until next time.
Justice for Blackguard's face.
Yes.
Bye.
Poor face.
Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chicken kind, more like the people.